us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
It's a good evening, everyone. Okay, so continuing to look at thy will be done, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So basically the thing here is that we know the will of God is revealed to us in His ways. Okay? His ways are what sometimes referred to as the commandments, but it's properly called divine instruction, okay? The Torah. So whatever comes from God to lead and direct us is His Torah. But remember that, yes, we have the ways of God, but we too come from God's being. In other words, God is the one who created us. And when God creates us, He says, let us make man. So as Genesis, puts it in symbolic language. Let us make man in our own image, after our own likeness. But the important thing is that when He fashioned Adam out of the clay, the second part of creation, basically he was not a living being until God did what? Breath. Yes, breathed into him the breath of life. Okay? The Hebrews call that the ruach, the breath of life. And he became a living being, which means that he shares in the very life of God. So despite our weaknesses, sin came into the picture, that shouldn't be lost, that we come from God, which means that deep within us, as God's creation, the craftsman, and He is basically, masterpiece, human being, that there is in us what connects us to God. We're going to look at that in depth when we get to what we call receiving Holy Communion. Okay? We'll see that. But now, if God's being is the source of our being, so it means that when we have the commandments like the Decalogue, they flow from the being of God and coming to what proceeds from Him as well, human beings. And so when we talk about the will of God, we know, as Scripture tells us again in different ways, that God's law, meaning God's instructions, are written deep within our hearts. Okay, we call that natural law. Natural law is different from the laws of nature. The laws of nature are physics, okay? Like gravity. When you jump, you come down. Okay? Unless you are an angel, you can float. But you want to jump, you come down. That's a law of nature. But natural law means God's law because He's the creator. And so you can see His fingerprints in creation. The finger of God in creation. And so that finger of God writes the law of God, the instructions of God, natural law, into our hearts. That's the meaning of natural law. It's different from the laws of nature. Okay? We are not talking about physics. We are talking about the law of God because He's the creator. That law is written deep within our hearts. So when God speaks to us, there is already something in us that is capable of responding to Him. Usually we may call that, the soul, mind, and will, but probably we may call it conscience. That's why you notice there is when a human being is created, and the brain is functioning well, everything is right, there is not such a thing as a dead conscience. As long as the person is still alive. You can't say, well, that person's conscience died. No, we may try to blur it, we may not try to listen to it, but we know that it is there. We can know what is good, we can know what is evil. Okay? And because we know what is good and evil, even some people who we call the worst people in humanity, they have no conscience or whatever, they lie. Why do they lie about things? Because they know what they're supposed to do. Otherwise, if I know that I don't know that I'm not supposed to do this, I don't know the difference between good and evil, why would I lie about anything? Okay? So that shows that there's no dead conscience. We know God can speak to us and we can respond. But as sin came into the picture, okay, and the blood basically darkened our intellect and will, our conscience. That's why the conscience, the intellect, the will can err, can go wrong. Because of original sin and the consequences of original sin, which lead into our personal sins. So that's why we need what we call positive divine revelation, Jesus Christ coming to us, okay, and clarifying everything for us. But again, clarifying wouldn't basically suffice, because you can tell me something and I see it and I know it, but I can't do it. So by clarifying everything, he also gives us the capacity to embrace him. Okay? So in him, we can see what we're supposed to be, but also in him, we are able to be what we're supposed to be. So if we want to do the will of God, where do we go? We go to Jesus Christ. And that's what we were looking at last week. Okay, so beginning on page 105, let's begin, repeat that paragraph up there. So the notes of our existence are interpreted for us so that we can read them and translate them into life, meaning in God's law. God's will flows from his being. Remember, we want to do God's will. How do we know it, that we may do it? So it flows from his being. That's why I don't discern God's will on my own. I don't say, well, I think this is what it is. It flows from him, and if it flows from him, it has to be revealed to me by him. If it's not revealed, I will not know what it is. That's why people have, including some, Christians, okay, have committed heinous crimes or sins in the name of God. Okay. This is what we critique ISIS for. Okay. Allah, whatever, okay? God. But which kind of God are we talking about? Because I have decided to determine what God's will is. What I think it is what it is. You see that? So atrocities, crimes, sins have been committed in the name of God. I remember, I think it was 2009 or 10, we went to the Holy Land, and you know they have those conflicts between Jews and Palestinians. But we're talking, and then the Jewish man came and he told me that killing Palestinians is God doing God's will. Oh. That's what he said. But also the other people think, some of the other people think the same way. They both have militants, extremists. Both the extremists who are Jews, extremists who are Palestinians. But they both think that way. Killing Palestinians is doing the will of God. Or for an extremist who is Palestinian, killing the Jews is doing the will of God. But what kind of will that is? When did God tell you to do that? Never, nowhere. But I'm thinking what God's will is. So this is very important, that God's will flows from his being, and therefore guides us into the truth of our being. In other words, there is no way I will know the truth of my being if I don't look up to where my being comes from. I don't look to where my being comes from. My being comes from God. And if I want to be true to myself, to my being, I have to be true to the source of my being. Okay? So that's what we are looking at here. So, God's will flows from his being and therefore guides us into the truth of our being, liberating us from self-destruction through falsehood. Because our being comes from God, we are able, despite all of the defilements that hold us back, meaning our sinfulness, weaknesses, we are able to set out on the way to God's will. The Old Testament concept of the just man means exactly that. To live from the Word of God, okay? I live by, from the Word of God, and so from his will, which is his word, from his will, and to find the path that leads into harmony with his will. Every time humans basically obey which we call obedience, by way of humility, we find ourselves. Because when we obey God, meaning God, we are being true to ourselves, and we will discover our true being. Whenever we rebel against God, we will never discover who we are. And that always ends up in self-destruction. If it doesn't end, it ends up in self-destruction. So, now, when Jesus speaks to us of God's will and of heaven, the place where God's will is fulfilled, the core of what he says is again connected with his mission. Okay? So we have to follow this very attentively. Okay? This is all the language of Pope Benedict. Okay? So it's not a novel. Okay? So it's a very theological, deep language. So now, when Jesus speaks to us of God's will and of heaven, the place where God's will is fulfilled, remember we said that where is heaven? Where God's will is done. Heaven encompasses, okay? Where God's will is done. Okay? Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So where God's will is done is heaven. So the place where God's will is fulfilled, the core of what he says is again connected with his mission. What is his mission? My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. So that is the mission of Jesus. What does that mean for us? What it simply means is our mission as humans cannot be any different from the mission of the incarnate Son. Because that is the mission that was destroyed right at the beginning of creation, okay, when Adam and Eve sinned. So our mission is to do the will of the one who made us. So he sent the Son to show us, to teach us what we should be doing to begin with in the first place. Okay? So my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. What he means is that his oneness with the Father's will is the foundation of his life. Oneness of his will with the Father is the foundation of his life. Which means for us that oneness of my will with the Father, with God, is the foundation of my life. The unity of his will with the Father's will is the core of his very being. Above all, though, what we hear in this petition, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, what we hear in this petition of the Our Father is an echo of Jesus' own passionate struggle in dialogue with his Father on the Mount of Olives. So, there are days we call like Holy Thursday. What happened on Holy Thursday? There was what we call the Last Supper, okay, in the course of which Jesus instituted the new covenant. Okay, so basically, when Jesus celebrates the Last Supper, he is not actually celebrating the Jewish Passover. He is fulfilling the Jewish Passover because he is the Passover lamb. Okay, so that's why he institutes the new covenant to fulfill what the old signified, prefigured. Okay, now he goes to the Mount of Olives that night. What happened there? Who did he go with? He went with Peter, James, and John, the sons of Zebedee. Okay? So he went with them. Those three are again the ones who went with to the Mount of the Transfiguration. Okay? So he goes to the Mount of Olives, and we are told that he prostrates himself, okay, and was sweating. His sweat became blood. Okay? So there in that garden, this is what happens. Jesus in his person, he's you see, as I said, is he a human person or a divine person or both? Is he a human person, a divine person, or both? Okay. We said before that if you forget everything about Jesus, just remember that he is not a human person. He is a divine person who assumed human nature. So in him there are two natures, human and divine, but the person is divine. Because he existed before time, from all eternity. The second person of the divine, of the Trinity, is divine, not human. It is this divine person who assumed our nature. So because of his divine personhood, is a divine person, he is able to take upon himself the entire weight of human sin. If we are human, we wouldn't be able to do that. But because of his divinity, the divine person who has a human nature, without ceasing to be divine, was able to load upon himself the entire weight of human sin. So in the Garden of Gethsemane at that moment, in a glance, okay, because God sees everything instantaneously and contemporaneously, Jesus could see the evil of all human sin, past, now, and future. That's why we are told, what did he do? That is like the concept of hell. So let's look at one of the passion narratives. Which one should we look at? Let's look at John. Okay, let's go to the Gospel of Matthew. Okay. Let's go to Matthew. Okay. So we begin at Matthew chapter 26. We begin with verse 18. Let's begin with verse 36. Okay. So this dialogue is what we are looking at now in this edition. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So when Jesus came with them to the place called Gethsemane, like the wine press, okay? And he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. Okay? So in the agony, that's why we always say that the Passion of Jesus Christ is a prayer event. Okay? He's offering prayers and supplications to the Father for our redemption. So the Passion is a prayer event from beginning to end. So you see here, he goes to the garden beginning his Passion. He went to pray. Okay? What did he do? The last thing he does on the cross is praying the Psalms, my God, Psalm 22. It's a prayer event. So we should never forget that. So, okay, and pray. I go there to pray. He took along Peter and the two sons of Zebedee. Who are they? Okay, and began to feel sorrow and distress. What is that about? The sorrow and the distress. Because of my sins. That is the sorrow, the distress. He was basically carrying, he loaded upon himself. Then he said to them, my soul is sorrowful even to death. Remain here and keep watch with me. What does that mean? Remain here and pray with me. Not stare at me, okay? Because he went to pray. Okay? he advanced a little and fell prostrate in prayer. Fell prostrate. That is a gesture of humility and obedience before the Father. So Jesus is teaching us how we should stand, okay, before God. How we should show ourselves before God. That's how he showed himself in this moment of passion and temptation. He prostrated himself. So you hear, as we said before, that there are these new inventors, innovators of the liturgy who tell us that we are no longer slaves. We are free children of God, children of the resurrection, so we no longer kneel. And that's why in some churches there are no kneelers, because we are the risen people and whatever. Okay? How do we rise from the dead? How do we rise? Because we die. You can't have the resurrection without death. In other words, we cannot share in the resurrection of Jesus Christ if we haven't died with him, dying to sin. If we haven't prostrated ourselves, meaning humility and obedience of faith. Okay? So to simply exalt the resurrection and at the same time forgetting where it came from is simply insane. So when we celebrate the Eucharist, the liturgy, we are celebrating the passion, death, and the resurrection. They are interconnected. Okay? So Jesus prostrates himself, okay, in prayer. Okay, in prayer, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." We are going to explain that. Pope Benedict helps us to explain that very, very well. So when he returned to his disciples, he found them asleep. He said to Peter, "So you could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not undergo the test." So basically, Pope Benedict explaining this, he says that this drowsiness of humanity is what makes the devil basically overpower us. Because when Jesus Christ is watchful and praying, regardless of the difficulty, the challenge, the weight of the cross he's undergoing, the devil doesn't have any power over him. So that's why he tells these people, you are sleeping. Okay? So we may go through life drowsing, sleeping. Okay? And that's what gives the stealthy one, the devil is very stealth. Okay? So he crawls when we are sleeping, meaning when we're not watchful, when we are not praying, that's when he has advantage over us. Okay, so pray that you may not undergo the test. Pray that the devil may not overtake you, overcome you. So the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Withdrawing a second time, he prayed again, "My Father, if it is not possible that this cup pass without my drinking it, your will be done." Okay? He's praying the same way the second time. Okay? Then he returned once more and found them asleep, for they could not keep their eyes open. He left them and withdrew again and prayed a third time, saying the same thing again. It's so funny when Catholics pray the Rosary, many of our other prayers, many of our Protestant brothers and sisters say, we are repetitive, and God says we shouldn't do that. Or he himself did. He's praying repetitively 3 times, saying the same thing. So he's violating his own rules. So the Greek translation for the other, I think it's Matthew 6, it means to pray with the heart involved. Okay? It doesn't say don't repeat prayer. It simply says that it's wrong to pray when the heart is not involved. When we are absent, we're just saying babbling words. It's not a command not to repeat prayer. Okay? The words simply mean to pray when the being, the heart, the mind is involved in the prayer. So you can pray the Hail Mary 100 times. As long as the heart and mind is involved in prayer, it's fine. Okay? I can pray the Hail Mary once, but if the mind and heart is not involved, it's not prayer. That's all it means. Then he returned to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Behold, the hour is at hand when the Son of Man is to be handed over to sinners. Get up, let us go. Look, my betrayer is at hand." Okay? So, that is what we are looking at, okay? So, let's what something here we want to see. Okay. To okay. So Luke says the same thing as well. So that is basically when Jesus prays, "Not my will, but your will be done." Okay? As we said, that it's a prayer event when he takes upon himself the entire weight of human sinfulness. What is he doing there? That's what we're going to explain, but let's look at it from this point of view. What he's doing there is this. When he takes upon himself the entire weight of human sin. What is human sin? Essentially. Yes. Disobedience. That's why when you read John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 29, okay, when John tells his disciples, Jesus is passing by, and he says, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin." He doesn't say sins. It must be say sins, but the sin of the world, the sin of rebellion against God. Okay? So once Adam and Eve rebelled against God, all subsequent sin is disobedience, rebellion, and what? And mistrust of God's goodness. Okay? That is what sin is. Disobedience, rebellion, and mistrust of God's goodness. So because you remember, the devil was telling Adam and Eve that God is not good. He's hiding things from you. And so they mistrusted God's goodness. That's what all sin is. So when Jesus takes upon himself the entire weight of human sin, what he is taking upon himself is our entire disobedience and rebellion. Okay? That's what he is doing. So, David, can I look at that book? So, this is what it is, okay? This is what distresses Jesus, okay? Because he came to overcome our rebellion against God. And that is what he does. And so, in our prefaces of ordinary time, the prayers we say, at Mass, prefaces of ordinary time, one of them is this. So I want you to listen to this, okay? So it says, this is preface number 7 of Ordinary Time. So it is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation, always and everywhere to give you thanks, Lord, Holy Father, Almighty and Eternal God. For you so loved the world, that in your mercy you sent us the Redeemer, to live like us in all things but sin, so that you might love in us what you loved in your Son, by whose obedience we have been restored to those gifts of yours that by sinning we had lost in disobedience. Listen to that again. For you so loved the world, that in your mercy you sent us the Redeemer, to live like us in all things but sin. Why did you send him? So that you might love in us what you loved in your Son, by whose obedience we have been restored to those gifts of yours that by sinning we had lost in disobedience. So that you might love in us what you loved in your Son. What does God the Father love in his Son?
Obedience.
Obedience. Okay? And what restores us to obedience? His obedience. And how did we lose God's goodness in us, his likeness? By sinning. And what is the sin? Disobedience. So, when Jesus Christ takes upon himself the entire weight of human sin in the Garden of Gethsemane, he is loading upon himself our disobedience, to defeat it by his obedience to the Father. That is the prostration before the Father. That is the humility before the Father, to destroy human disobedience, human rebellion, so that the Father might see in us what he sees in the Son. Okay? So usually the English uses, sonship, but childship. But our sonship in God lies in obedience. Because God the Father cannot see his Son in other way after the incarnation, except as the incarnate God. And the incarnate God has a body, and that body includes all of us. And the Father, the only way the Father can see us through his Son, with his Son, and in his Son, is by way of our obedience. So in other words, if I'm not obedient, the Father doesn't see me. And that seeing means knowledge. Not that God can't see me, okay? We know that he sees me, not that he can't know me. But the knowledge we are talking about is the knowledge of delighting in me. This is my beloved child. Okay? The Father doesn't see me. We read, I think, in it was Matthew chapter 7. Okay? We came to Mass every day. Do you want to look at that text? Okay? Matthew, Sermon on the Mount. So, God has to recognize us, to see us. So, it's Matthew chapter 7, beginning with verse 21. Obedience is salvation. Obedience is our salvation. Matthew 7, verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. That will is obedience. Because Jesus is pleasing to the Father because of his obedience. Okay? Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not drive out demons in your name? Did we not do mighty deeds in your name? I was a priest, I presided over Mass. Didn't you see me? I was an altar server every Sunday. Didn't you see me? Here was whatever. If we are not obedient, we'll say, then we will declare to them solemnly, I never knew you. Depart from me, you evildoers. You didn't do my will. That is the reason the Son came into the world. That is the reason of his incarnation, his passion, his death, his resurrection, to conquer human disobedience. And so that is the essence of our faith. If there is, that's why you notice the devil constantly tempts us into disobedience. Because he knows that once we are disobedient, we can't be pleasing to God. We are like him, the devil. So obedience makes us Christ-like. Obedience is so key. The devil has found a way, of course all through generations, but especially in our generation, which thinks that we are more enlightened than people who lived before us, which I think is not true. Okay? Probably some other generations were wiser than we are today. But because we think that we're very intellectual and so on and so forth, so we tend to trust in our own powers. Okay? We only invite God for our own convenience. Okay? In other words, God, I will talk about God if God follows me. That's where you hear this attitude that, I don't care what the church says, this is between me and my God. Okay? The church can say, God can say, but I know the goodness of God, I know the mercy of God more than God does. So God, I will tell you what your goodness is, I will tell you what your mercy is. Okay? Because this is what I want. And God, you have to rubber stamp it. Okay? So that attitude. Okay? So this is what Jesus is doing for us in the garden. Okay? So, okay. So we say, okay, we say that so Jesus prays again, this cup take it away from me, nevertheless not as I will, but as you will. So in the gospel, according to John, the prayer of Jesus is, Father, save me from this hour. Father, glorify your name. Save me from this hour, glorify your name. The relationship between these two prayers in John's account is essentially no different from what we find in the Synoptics. Synoptics meaning Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They are called a synopsis because they are similar. Okay? The Gospel of John is very different structure-wise from these two. Rather from these three. Okay. So the anguish of Jesus, so keep that in mind. What the synoptics say, okay? This cup, take this cup away from me, but not as I will, but as you will. And then in John, Jesus saying, okay, Father, save me from this hour. Father, glorify your name. That is very, very important. Save me from this hour. Glorify your name. So keep that in mind. So the relationship between these two prayers in John's account is essentially no different from what we find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The anguish of Jesus' human soul, I am troubled. Did Jesus have a human soul?
Yes.
Did Jesus have a human soul? Okay.
Good question. He wasn't human. Human soul.
A human soul.
He's called God, the Son, capital S, okay? Son, meaning God. That's the meaning of that's capital S. So the second person of the Trinity became incarnate, because the Word, he became incarnate. So the second person of the, he is divine, okay? He is God, okay? Divine. Now, this is a long explanation. Did we explain the analogy of the Trinity using a human being before? Okay, it's important. Let's explain it again. So to understand it, we can't fully understand the Trinity. Okay? But we have enough understanding that has been revealed to us about God, which we need for our salvation. Okay? So we can't say, well, I didn't understand God well, so I can't be saved. We have enough knowledge of God. Whatever we need to be saved has been revealed to us. But remember, our intellect is limited. The capacity of our intellect is limited. We give this example. Okay? Do we believe that there are bacteria around us now?
Yes.
Viruses?
Yes.
Show them to me. Show me a virus or a bacteria. Show me bacteria. Where is it?
Reaching my program.
In your house?
No.
Yes, we believe they're there, okay? Because we know they're there. But it doesn't mean that our eyes are defective. They are functional, they are well, but we can't see them. Why? Because they lie beyond the natural capacity of the eye to see. It doesn't mean that the eye is defective, but the thing is so small that the eye naturally doesn't have the capacity to see it. It needs some help to be able to see it. We call that help a microscope. Okay? So also we said that our intellect is limited. Not that it is defective, but we are not God. It is limited. So oftentimes humans forget that our intellect is limited. So just as our eyes are limited, they can't see certain things until they are aided, so also our intellect is limited. It cannot know certain things until it receives some aid. So we call faith, by way of analogy, a supernatural microscope, which helps us to see realities beyond its natural capacity. So we can look at the Eucharist, an atheist and a believer, and we see two different things. Because the atheist sees what I see, okay? But I see much more because I have a microscope, and he doesn't. Okay? So we will keep that in mind, that the human intellect is limited. So this analogy, again, it's crude, but it helps us to understand, get into the nature of God, to explain oneness of God in three persons. So we say God is a communion of persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Father is the one who begets the Son. Okay? From all eternity, there is an exchange of love, because that's the life of the Father. Love is the life of the Father. Okay? And then the Son reciprocates the same. But that reciprocation of love and life goes through the Holy Spirit. Okay? The Holy Spirit. So to explain that crudely, to just kind of have a picture of it, we can again use the image of God, a human being, to have some glimpse into the interior nature of the communion of God. So, I am a human being, I know it, okay? So, Kelly, are you that girl? Yes, you are. Are you that girl? Why do you say no?
She's sitting over there, I'm sitting right here.
Because you know yourself, right? I can't confuse you that you are that girl, okay? Because you know yourself. How do you know yourself? Do you know yourself?
Yeah.
How do you know yourself? We can't be confused about that you are that person. No, I know who I am, but how do I know myself? Okay? The way we know ourselves, okay? I am, okay? And I know myself because I have conceived the reality of myself in my mind. So in other words, I am conceived in my mind. I know myself. I have conceived myself in my mind. You see that? Okay? Okay? So I'm the same person. I have, we don't want to call it an idea, the reality of who I am in my mind. Because I know who I am, I'm conceived in me. So you can't tell me that I'm that gentleman, I am that gentleman. No, I know who I am. Because I have conceived myself in my mind. So, conceived myself in my mind, and then when I act, whatever I do proceeds, okay, proceeds from that self-knowledge. That's why I'm responsible for what I do. I can't do dumb things to you. You ask me, why did you do this? I say, well, it wasn't me. I don't know. No, you know, because you did it. Unless you are basically, you know, the mind is gone. But if we do certain things, that's why we're held accountable, because they proceed from self-knowledge, which usually we call free will. I know myself, this is why I did A, B, C, D. So by way of analogy, this is one person. There are three. I am one person who knows myself, self-knowledge, okay, self-awareness, and I act according to that self-awareness. So in the same way, by way of analogy, the Father knows himself, and the knowledge of the Father is his Son. That's why Jesus says, to know me is to know the Father. So the Father knows himself from all eternity. That knowledge of himself is the Son. So it's like he conceives the Son in his mind. But from all eternity, there is no beginning. Okay? That's why we can't fully understand this mystery. But we can look at a human being and have some glimpse. So the Father has self-knowledge of himself, who is the Son from all eternity, self-awareness. He knows himself. And then, from that knowledge, okay, of the Father and Son, they proceed and act. And their act is called love, who is the Holy Spirit. That's why we say the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Okay? So just as our actions proceed from us and our self-awareness. Okay? So that is the Trinity. So never go and say, oh, now we understand the Trinity. Okay? I remember one time we were in class, and you know, there was we were studying the Trinity, okay? And then one seminarian was like this. And so the teacher, who was a Jesuit in Columbus, Ohio, was a good teacher. He died now, but he was a good teacher. So the boy was like this. And then he pointed at him, you, did you understand what I just explained? And he said, yes. What did you understand that I don't understand? And he said, yes. Okay? But you know, that can give us in a certain glimpse, because when you say, how three in persons, three in one, and whatever, okay? That's kind of, you know, a glimpse into the nature of God. Okay, so the Son, the knowledge of the Father, his self-awareness, the Son, the second person of the divinity, comes down. Usually we say come down, okay? But we mean incarnation. He became incarnate. This divine person, second person of the